Норм, да? Треба говорить глич. Скажи глич. Что? Глич. Так, что я там сказал? Сейчас одуплюсь. Здесь есть несколько входных отверстий.
Блоки. Там слишком длинно, может быть, это
Несколько входных отверстий. Так, давай вот это все сейчас соберем и скажем.
Hello everyone, my name is Kirill, you're on the AutoAdviser channel. Today we will talk about a very important system, which is the lungs of an international combustion engine. It's called the Crankcase ventilation system. Many are not aware of its existence, and in general this system is not given due attention. Let's look into the problem. Let's say this is an engine piston that performs reciprocating motions. So here is the combustion chamber, and when the full air mixture burns here, high pressure is created and part of the gases, the exhaust gases, already break through in the space between the piston itself and the walls of the engine. And these gases enter the crankcase of the engine itself. Many may object, where does the space between the piston and the engine walls come from? Everywhere there are compression and oil scrapers rings, but in reality these spaces exist and they increase with time of operation, with wear of the piston group. It turns out that exhaust gases enter the crankcase of the engine, and together with the exhaust gases, part of the fuel air mixture, for example, gasoline vapors, can get there. What problems can there be? Problem number one is these gases can mix with engine oil. That is, the oil will change its physical and working properties, which negatively affects the life of the engine as a whole. Problem number two is that inside the engine these gases create increased pressure. This can cause oil to be squeezed out of the engine. It will seep through the gaskets, through the crankshaft oil seals. And there are even cases when excess pressure raises the dipstick and oil leaks through it. For these reasons, it turns out that we must somehow remove these gases that get inside the engine. That is why I said at the beginning of the video that this is a very important system. Initially, this problem was solved by installing a so-called breather on the engine. This is a kind of valve or outlet for a simple one through which the gases that got inside the engine should have escaped. Such a system was called open because the exhaust gases were discharged simply under the bonnet space of the engine and directly fell into the atmosphere. And it seemed that this somehow solved the problem, but there were nuances with the environment and with the fact that some of these gases that fell under the hood space could get further into the salon, and it was just uncomfortable for passengers and the driver of the car. In this regard, the so-called closed system was developed. Crankcase gases were taken from the engine and then entered the intake manifold, and then again into the combustion chamber. Thus, the cycle was closed and we didn't emit anything into the atmosphere and everyone was happy. It should also be noted that depending on the manufacturer, the system is structurally slightly different, but nevertheless there are three main elements everywhere. The first is the pipes of the system, the second is the oil separator, and the third is directly the valve of the ventilation system. I think it makes no sense to dwell on what pipes are. They are just pipes through which crankcase gases flow. Therefore, let's immediately move on to the oil separator. I have a sample of it here. It is, which is installed on a BMW X5 car with a 4.4-liter gasoline engine. Based on the name, the oil separator, is clear that this device should separate oil from crankcase gases, because if we don't do this, then over time we will simply suck all the oil out of the crankcase. According to the principle of operation, there are centrifugal or labyrinth type of oil respirators. And in modern cars a combination of these two types is often installed. If you look at the product itself, then it can be either a separate device like mine in this case, or it can be mounted in the valve cover or the engine crankcase itself. I now have a centrifugal type of oil respirator in my hands. This is the inlet where crankcase gases are sucked in. Further inside the device they are given such a circular motion, and further inside the device they are twisted so that they move in a circle, and the particles are affected by the centrifugal acceleration, and the oil particles are heavier than the gas particles. So the oil settles on the walls of the device itself. Let's once again in simple terms. Crankcase gases enter here. Inside the device they twist in a spiral. Then here they sharply change the direction of movement upwards and exist through this tube due to the fact that there is a sharp change in the direction of movement and centrifugal forces. Then heavier oil parts flow down or down walls or just corner fall down, and then the oil returns to our engine. An interesting fact is that a device of a similar shape and principle of operation can be found on the roofs of industrial enterprises or factories where this device serves to purify the air. The principle of operation is the same as inside the oil separator. As for the second type of oil separator, which is called a labyrinth, there is such an intricate labyrinth inside through which crankcase gases move, and due to a sharp change in direction inside this labyrinth, oil particles simply settle on the walls of this device. And now let's look at the important part, the valve of the crankcase ventilation system. In my hands now is the so-called membrane valve. This particular model is installed on an Audi car with a volume of 1.9. This is an Audi A6 and C6 diesel engine. The operation of this valve is based on the vacuum that is created in the intake manifold. That is, this valve is connected to the intake manifold with a pipe. An empty manifold sucks in air from the atmosphere into the engine, so there is a gap there. So if there is a small vacuum, then this valve is open and crankcase gases are sucked out of the engine into the intake manifold. If there is too much vacuum in the intake manifold, then this valve, on the contrary, closes so that we don't create a vacuum inside the engine at all. Structurally, there is a membrane inside this valve. In some designs there are even two membranes. There is also a spring there, and this valve works dependent on the vacuum in the intake manifold. You can ask why this valve is needed at all. Why can't we connect the crankcase to the intake manifold? The fact is that there can be a very strong vacuum in the intake manifold. So we will create a vacuum inside the engine, and then these exhaust gases of ours will be sucked into the engine. And all this will end badly, as you understand. This valve is a very important part that regulates how much gases we suck out of the engine. Therefore, if it breaks, there are certain consequences. Once again, I know that structurally the system and specifically these details may differ depending on the manufacturer. And some manufacturers, for example Volkswagen, with an engine capacity of 1.6 and 2.0 TDI, even have heating in this system. Its simple crankcase gases can contain water, that is, when water vapor enters the pipes, this water can settle on the walls of these pipes and freeze at low temperatures, which leads to rupture and closure of these pipes. By the way, if you need to buy new spare parts of this system, whether it's a crankcase ventilation valve or an oil separator, be sure to visit our website. The link will be in the description. So, summing up, we can say that the crankcase ventilation system is the lungs of the engine. It seems to be such a small but important system, because if it falls for any reason, then oil starts to squeeze out of the engine. That is, it leaks, and these smudges are observed in places of seals or in place of gaskets. The second point is that these crankcase gases mix with our oil and violate its properties. That is, the properties of the oil fall, and all this leads to a decrease in the resource of the oil itself and the engine as a whole. Usually, this system reduces its performance at high millage. If the millage is more than 300 or 350,000 kilometers, then the elements of this system usually become clogged. This valve is clogged particularly if still works, but not quite effectively. Then the oil separator and pipes of this system become clogged. Also, with an increase in millage, the piston group wears out and the space between the pistons and engine walls increases, and more exhaust gases begin to enter the engine, therefore there is pressure. This can be checked quite easily if you unscrew the cap through which oil is poured into the engine and put your hand there. That is, close this hole, then you should not feel excessive pressure. If you feel excessive pressure, it means that the ventilation system is not sucking exhausted gas enough. In general, this is all what I wanted to say about this system. I hope you enjoyed my explanation. Be sure to like this video, comment and to subscribe to our channel. And all the best to you and see you soon!